Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. How the heck are you? We are into July 2024. Wow, this year has gone by fast. This is, I'm hoping it's a great episode with Jen. We just finished recording, so it's hard to know, and we've been through a lot in the last couple of days. It takes us a while to get to it, but what we talk about in this episode, there are some specific things that happened in our relationship in the last week or two. We're fine. Everything's okay. But I felt safe enough to get really, really, really big mad on Sunday, and Jen didn't know that I was mad. This has to do with our attachment injuries, but we also talk about if you are in relationship with people that have a different neurotype than you, and Jen's ADHD is what is driving her car, and my autism is what's driving my car. And part of what we bump up against in our relationship is how I want her to show up with the same values and the same way of communication and processing that I do. And we're wired very differently. And she needs some grace from me as well, because she shows up very differently. We talk about ableism, some of the words that she uses when she describes what goes on for her around her ADHD. I tell her that's ableist. And many people don't want to get a diagnosis, but if you don't get a diagnosis of ADHD, autism, or whatever it is, you get other labels. You get called lazy, a procrastinator, rigid, inflexible, and there are lots of them. So I think it's a great episode. We start out sharing what our gremlins are, then I try and give you what the overall topic is of how we show up very differently. And then we kind of drop into the stories of what has happened in the last couple of days and how we navigated through me finally feeling safe enough to feel very angry. We chatted after the episode and processed a little bit more, because it was just yesterday that we talked after I was really, really angry, and asked how was it with my anger, and knowing that there's a space for that, and that I see it as being very positive, because historically it has not been safe to be angry in relationships. And we talk about this at the end of the episode. I think y'all really get a nice little peek into the struggles that we have and how we navigate through them, and how we imperfectly do relationships, and how we're really committed to showing up and doing the work and knowing that these are things that we're just going to keep bumping up against, and how do we make the adjustments that we can. I just think it's beautiful. I'm hoping that you will enjoy it as well. We talk about object permanence, having conversations like Jen will think that we've had a conversation because she had it in her head and she hasn't communicated to me about my need to have a container. She says in the episode that I said that she was unkind when we talked on Sunday. And I asked her after we were recording, I'm curious, did I ask that you were unkind, or did I just say that it was unkind that, I sat all day waiting? And then she looked over my text, and I have a really hard time. My whole MO is about, I'm struggling a little. I'm waiting for your call. And she thought I was just naming things. And what I really, in retrospect, could have said is, I'm really having a hard time, and I wish that I knew when you were going to call. That would give me more security. So I need to show up more and be more direct and let her know. And Jen we talk a little bit about the view of friendship, platonic friendships under the polyamory framework. And she talks about loving people non-possessively. So I think it's a great episode. Oh, I just remembered something that I forgot to share. And I'm going to share this now because I think it's really important. So this kind of goes in when Jen forgets and she asks me to reel her in. I went to a game night, last week with some women. And usually I'm very type A when I play games. I'm on the ball. Everybody, get ready. And I don't have to wait for people. And my turn was over and I did not verbalize it. And we're sitting around in silence for several minutes. And I didn't indicate that my turn was over, and they were all waiting on me. And I said to the person whose turn was next, I said, I am so sorry. If this happens again, please ask me, because, I said, the good news is that I must be relaxed enough that I'm not hypervigilant. And it happened a second time and nobody said anything. And I just felt awful. And what I was imagining is that they felt bad having to remind me. But it's like, if you don't remind me, then we're going to be sitting around all night. I'm not saying it's their responsibility, but how this relates to what Jen and I talk about is Jen talks about reel me in, show up in my face, because with my ADHD, I just attend to whatever's in front of me. And so she's giving me permission. And this is just the same thing of I'm giving somebody permission to go like, are you done yet? We're all sitting around. But if nobody says anything, we're going to be sitting around for a long time. In the same respect with Jen, when she says, reel me in, show up. If I'm not showing up for you and you need me to, show up. And as long as my attachment injuries haven't gotten so far that I'm spiraling, I need to pull her in, because she just, the way her brain is wired, she will respond to what's in front of her. And if it's not me, it's going to be something else. So I think that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoy the episode. I think it's a great episode and I hope you benefit from it. And now on to the show. Hey, Jen.
Hi, my dear.
We have not recorded in, I think, about 3 weeks.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, there's a moment illustrating my complete lack of time orientation. Like, surely it was not more than, Oh,
yeah.
Gosh. 3 whole weeks. Oof, I'm sorry.
Well, we missed 2 weeks, so this is the 3rd week.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we want to start out talking about Gremlins before we get going?
Oh, let's see. Yeah, I kind of always have the gremlin that, it's funny, this comes up a lot in sessions too, where I'll be like, I'm making sense, right? Because sometimes I think I lose that ability to track and just sort of hope that I have something to offer. I know I had mentioned a little gremlin because we had, I don't know, what do you want to call it? I know I had a friend once that called them like bumps, like when you bump up against each other.
I had a big mad. I had a very big mad. a very big, terribly, awfully big mad.
So I think maybe one of my gremlins, because in my historical context, when someone was mad, it was a given that I was an a-hole. So I hope I can say that on the podcast. Yeah. I guess I have a gremlin that's like, oh gosh. I mean, I'm a pretty humble person, so I know that we all have those tendencies inside us, but yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And for me, I feel vulnerable talking about my attachment injuries. And even we'll circle back to this, but if you've been listening to all of these episodes as we're going through this, what I say often from episode to episode changes, because as I'm growing and changing, what I'm needing is changing. And part of what you had brought up was that a while back, I said, I want you to show up however you want to show up when you show up, and I'm going to manage on my own. And now what I'm recognizing is there are some things that happen between us that often will activate my attachment injury. So it changes that narrative for me of, I'm the one that's always injured, but we'll talk about what this means a little bit later on. But when there's a lack of a container, that often will activate me. And so I am wanting more from you now because I don't want to be activated. And part of what we're going to be talking about is you and I show up in the world very differently. And many of you have relationships with partners, with friends, where how you're wired is very different. And how do we navigate this? And so I have this narrative of, I'm the one that always is getting injured and has the attachment injuries, where you have the gremlin of your behavior is problematic. And I think just having these conversations is important.
Yeah, I know I've learned so much in the container of our friendship. And one of the things that I really appreciated over the last couple of days, and this has happened to us before, is just a willingness to continue to show up.
Yeah.
Which I know sometimes I feel my kind of, whether it's the avoid, aloof, like just hole up for a while. So I know that's good. And I know talking about these differences can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe what would be helpful is if we just speak in generalities first of what is different about how we show up, our orientation to time, to relationships, and then we can talk about specifics.
Well, the time piece, I mean, I was just laughing because I'm like, what? 3 weeks? Like, and I've had this in other friendships before. I think it's a symptom of ADHD, right?
It is.
But, something might take me weeks to kind of circle back, and the person sadly it's almost like just living on a totally different wavelength time-wise. Whereas I don't think I've done anything wrong. And if I reach out 4 weeks later or 6 months, I mean, it's hard to even for me to put a time frame on it. Maybe it's 6 months later, but they've been mad since 2 months or 4 weeks or whatever, or 2 weeks. Like, it's funny. I just think that, and I know for myself, like I've had expectations that I didn't even know I had get realized and then get violated. And it is an angry response, and that's human, so human, right? And a lot of times we don't even realize we're holding those types of expectations. And I know that I don't mean to flake out. It's actually a really big trope of mine. Like, it's gotten to the point where I won't want to make plans because I'm like, I'm very challenged with time management. And the last thing I want to do is continue to flake out. But the people who are closest to me do understand that, make allowances, and I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah.
And in my kind of unmedicated, very sloppy way. And that's where I always start to sound like I'm just making excuses, which is, I think, a harsh way of approaching myself with this.
Well, I think that's the ableism around when you have a disability, and I'm going to call ADHD and autism a disability, that if for people that are like, I don't want a label, well, then yeah, you're going to have other labels: lazy, rigid, unempathetic. I can't think of other ones, but you procrastinate, you don't get things done, you're flaky, you're not dependable. That those are going to be the labels that you're going to have if you don't want the label. And what I hear you saying is that's ableism around ADHD and not having it named, and it makes it hard to show up. And one of the things that I've done that's really helpful is, are we having a solid plan? Is this a tentative plan? Or I'll say, like, I need a back door. I think I can show up, but I really need to wait and see. Is that okay with you? And I would much rather have someone, if they're going to make a plan with me, to let me know that it's tentative or they may need to change their mind. And then I know that in my mind, I'm probably going to have a plan B if that doesn't work. And the plan B, maybe I'm going to crochet and knit or crochet and watch TV all night. It's not like I have this drive to go out.
Right. Well, and it's managing expectations too.
Right.
And it's funny when I'm masking and I'm trying to, in some ways, hide the fact that I can flake out at a moment's notice or space out. And I think the painful thing in relationship is when there's a narrative that's done, intentionally. It really never is. I had my dear friend text me like, hey, you coming? Like 45 minutes into an appointment, a dinner that I wanted to go to. And I'm like, I'll be right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So for you, your ADHD is driving, and for me, my autism is driving. And what that looks like is I want a plan. I want a schedule. If I send you information, this is for me in my ideal world, that, you would respond to what I say within a relatively short amount of time. If I'm letting you know something is going on, you would be able to respond. That's not to say that I don't have room for flexibility, but I'm a planner, I'm an organizer, I'm a scheduler. Those things, that's how I drive my car. And is it okay for me to share what my perception is about how your ADHD shows up?
Sure. I'd be curious how you put it, because I know how it feels to me. Because I'm being the opposite of that. Like, I'm like where's the fire?
Yeah. That for you, what's in front of you will get your attention. And that where I want to schedule and, nail things down, you kind of want to see how things go. And there's a lot of moving pieces. Our lives are also very different. And that's another thing. But I think that you go more by what is working and what needs to be done. But really what gets your attention is what's in front of you. And scheduling and planning, because there are so many pieces in your life combined with your ADHD and your sense of time, like our relationship with time is very different. And part of what happened in this, my very big mad, is I needed some time and attention from you. And in my autistic world, what I would have loved is, I've got stuff going on, but I expect that I'll be free after 5 o'clock tonight. And I know that that doesn't work for you, which is why I didn't ask for it. You had a lot of other things going on, but that is a way that, for me, injuries happen. And I know that you don't do this intentionally. And it's hard when I'm starting to feel dysregulated, and that creates a container when I know, oh, at this time, you will have time and space for me. And without that container, I just unraveled.
Yeah. And by the time I did reach out, you had already been mad probably for hours.
About an hour.
Okay.
I noticed myself just starting to spiral. We walked the dogs and I was really dysregulated. I came home and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And then you called and we haven't had anger in our relationship. We've not dealt with any anger, and that's over 5 years. It's a long time to not have anger.
That's true. I'm so curious too. I know we were talking a little bit about this, but the part in the MO in me, and I don't know, again, if this is that, I'm that distracted type, I'm in my head. The HSP sort of identifiers that rich inner world and just kind of like I'm up here in my head, and then I get pulled out to deal with whatever's like right in front of me, usually very happily to do that. Mm-hmm. Because I think another thing, and I don't know that we've articulated this well, there was this thing that I know there is no like world in which, had you reached out to me and entered into my life space vis-a-vis a FaceTime call, whether I'm up on my garage roof or whatever, where I wouldn't have answered and been like, oh, hey, look at what I'm doing. And here's the people I'm with. And this is what's going on. And you're welcome. And I'm happy that you're here. Versus, and I had this thought even, but then didn't make it happen, of me reaching out. And that's interesting too, because I know part of the dynamic, and I think that this was a point of irritation too, was you don't want to have to be in a crisis to get my attention, but that seems to be the way I operate, or you kind of show up here. And it's been lifelong for me. Like the friends I've had that are lifelong friends are the ones who don't let me out of their orbit, because I will spin off, and they don't make the story up that it means I don't care about them or they're not important to me. And I think this is an ADHD trope, right? That may feel familiar to people who also struggle with this. It's like, oh, 5 years went by and I forgot to reach out, but it doesn't mean you're not important to me. And I know that sounds like total BS in a certain way. And maybe that's, again, the ableism that you're talking about.
That's
but
the ableism.
I sorely miss, I could jot down a list right now of easily, I could probably come up with between 5 and 10 people that I dearly miss, that I just haven't reached out to. They haven't reached out to me. There's no good reason. And I don't know. I'm not even sure what to do about that.
Yeah. And part of what we've talked about before is, on a number of occasions, you've thought you've communicated something with me. This is your ADHD. In your head, we've had this conversation, but I never received that communication. And it also has
I'm
to
laughing at myself. I don't.
And when we did our repair work 2 days after this happened, or one day after it happened, you had said, I was thinking about sending you pictures. And it's like, when I'm feeling injured, that doesn't do anything for me, but this is what goes on for you, that you are thinking about me and holding me, but in the place that I'm in, that it doesn't do much for me. But that's also part of the ADHD.
Absolutely. Like, it's funny how my gremlin was, I didn't want to feel like an a-hole right now. And I am holding enough self-compassion for myself right now to be able to look at some of this stuff. But I'm also kind of laughing a little bit. Like, I could open up this cabinet behind me, and I have several presents that I've bought for people that I just never get around to giving them. It's like I definitely have some disconnects in my brain.
That's ADHD. I mean, all those things are ADHD.
Yep.
Yeah. And what happens is, and we've talked about this, and it's interesting because, so I'm going to give some context and some story. Last Tuesday, you had something big happen. You left me a polo saying, hey, I'm going to be cocooning. So you're going to disappear for a couple days. I totally appreciated, like, that creates a container for me. I know that you're cocooning. And I was fine until we started to walk the dogs that night. And then I recalled something big happened that day. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm wondering if you're angry with me because I didn't ask you about it and I didn't reach out. And that started my attachment injury. So for me, part of creating a container, which we have not done, is, does that mean that I reach out to you? Does that mean that part of being a good friend is like I send you texts letting you know I'm thinking about you? Is that annoying you? And we hadn't talked about that. So part of my autism is like, I don't know what a good friend does. Does a good, like my attachment injury says, leave you the F alone. You asked to cocoon and I should just not be showing up. And then there's another part that's like, well, I should be just letting you know I'm thinking about you and I support you. So being in that place of ambivalence is really, really challenging for me. And we hadn't talked about what does it look like when you cocoon. So part of me had compassion because you're going through something and I understand. And then on Thursday, when you sent me a polo and you told me what had happened. Oh, and I sent you a polo that night going, I don't know if you're upset because I didn't ask about this thing. I don't know if I've done something wrong or if you need something from me. But you didn't watch the polo till Thursday. And as I was trying to manage my activation, I kept looking to see if you had watched the polo. That activated me. And I so want to delete those polos when they're not watched because my injury is around I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, I don't feel important. I think that there is a big element of OCD that comes up for me, and it has been overwhelming and painful, and it doesn't feel like it's very average. So I just want to say that on top of it. So when I got your polo Thursday and found out what it was about, I thought, if I had known that that's what was going on, I don't suspect that I would have been activated. I may have. And this is not to say that you needed to tell me, because we talked about afterwards, what is it that you're wanting and needing when you cocoon? What is okay for me to do? And part of what we talked about is me saying, hey, is there anything that I've done? Are you angry with me? And that you will always have space for that.
I do, because I have that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. We hadn't clearly delineated expectations around that. And I suspect that I'm fine, but I'm slow to respond. Like I'm just really slow to respond when I'm in that sort of, feels like, I mean, a cocoon's a good way to put it. Sitting in molasses soup.
Yeah.
Like I'm just not.
Yeah. And for me, what creates security and attachment is when we have frequent communication. So when we don't have that, and then I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing, it's very possible that we can talk about all of these ways to create a container and I still may get activated. So I want to be very clear. And you and I have talked about this, that I don't want to be in a position of, if you just did this, then I wouldn't get activated. If you just did that, because I can't say with certainty. And part of the anger that came up was this awareness that there are areas where we haven't done work to create a container. And my narrative has been, how come I'm always getting activated? And now I'm like, wait, there are things that we both could be doing so that I'm less likely to get activated because that container is set. And then that just kind of put me into a rage. But on Friday, I hadn't heard from you. And you've said before, pull me in. But as I'm going through these attachment injuries, the wound is, I don't matter. I'm not important. I'm not a priority. So I will tell you that I need you, or I'll reach out with a polo with an expectation that you'll respond. And then when you don't, it validates my narrative and my wounding. And so I don't want to reach out. And on Friday, I hadn't heard from you. And I thought, okay, I need to pull you in. And I think I sent you a text or a polo or something. And then you started to polo me and I watched the polo and then we got on FaceTime. But it was a few hours after I'd gotten up. And this was a perfect example of like, I just need to go, hey, I'm here. And you're like, okay, I got you. Let's connect.
Yeah.
How are you doing? I know I said a lot. So I'm just, how are you doing?
Better than I thought I would before we record.
And if you have a different perspective, because I have a narrative going and you have a narrative going, and I think sharing that would be really helpful.
I'm not sure that I have a narrative going. I mean, I know what that discursive thought, and I'm not feeling those attachment wounds right now.
Mm-hmm. Hallelujah.
Yeah, right? I know. This is like new territory for me. I've done so much early attachment wound work in the last, 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know you have too. I know that I had a moment where I wasn't feeling safe, which is probably a version of an attachment wound.
Is that after when we talked yesterday?
this would have been triggered Sunday.
When you called and I was big mad.
Called and you were really mad. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay. And I think we decided to end the call because I wasn't having a whole lot of capacity to receive a lot of the anger. And so it wasn't until the next day. And then I think when we were just able to express, you had a very, if I can speak for it, right? It's just a very young, angry part that, really wanted to be understood. And in this angry part's young way, the way to be understood would be for me to feel that way. And so this, it was coming across as like wanting me to be hurt as much as it was hurting.
Yeah.
Which I get. I can totally understand that from a, especially from a young part perspective. But then it got me. Like, it's funny. We should talk about anger and how it can show up. And, from my learning history, some of that anger can be really dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So
your experience with people in your life that get angry is it is dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I was able to eke out a tearful, are my story safe with you? Or, is that, and I think by this time it's a good 24 hours later. I think we had both slept, although I had a nightmare, which was weird. It was a angry, like a physically aggressive nightmare. But anyway, we were able to just talk about that. And, again, if you're able to handle this stuff as like, these are stories, there are absolutely things in present time to be discussed. And, hey, would you be willing to do this? Or, hey, how about trying that? And, stuff to figure out in relationship. And then there's the wounding underneath, which matches a narrative and can speak directly to that. None of this meant that you didn't matter to me. And your having that angry part doesn't mean you're gonna go find the first bus to throw me under.
Yeah. Well, part of that too, and then I want to go back and give some more context and stories so people kind of can follow along. But I think that what I said is I was angry and I wanted you to hurt too. And I don't know if I articulated what that would look like when we talked on Sunday.
That was very brief. Probably not. There wasn't a lot of time.
Yeah. And so when we talked following day, and I think I used the same words, knowing what that meant to me, I don't know that it was clear to you that I just wanted you to feel the same disconnect and loneliness and hopelessness and overwhelm, that it wasn't that I wanted to damage who you are, your reputation, or anything like that. And so when I left you a polo today, so today is Tuesday, we talked yesterday, and I was big mad Sunday. I said, I want to give you some more information about what that anger looks like, if this is helpful. There's nothing in my history where I could record a podcast episode, but the truth is I feel so protective of our relationship and of you, the listener, that if something did happen between us, I don't think that I would want to talk about it because I feel very protective about the listener and about your privacy, even if I'm struggling. But I don't have a history of losing it when a relationship doesn't work out. But it's that young part that just felt so powerless. And it was so bad that I had coaching yesterday too, that really I felt so hopeless. It was like, I don't want to do relationships anymore. They're too hard. They're too painful. I can't do this. Like, I don't know what the alternative would be. But thinking, and if you've listened to earlier podcast episodes where I talk about this high need to connect, and I think that disconnect, and I think the other thing that's really important to share in this is a few weeks ago, I had spoken with you about this idea of having a platonic life partnership or a platonic relationship. Are you okay if I talk about this?
Sure. Yeah.
And when my coach talked to me about it, it really resonated for me. And I felt in that moment a really secure attachment to you. I have an episode that's a few episodes earlier than this, and the title talks about, I think, polygamy and monogamistic relationships in terms of friendships. So just look back a couple episodes.
Polyamory. Yeah.
Polyamory. And it resonated with me, and you and I talked about it. And then there's just been a lot of other things that have been going on, major things in your life that have been pulling. And I've left a couple polos where I talk about it. And this is one of those things where I think you're processing. There's a lot going on. You haven't gotten back to me. But I think the undercurrent here was it resonated so much for me, and it created a sense of security for me, and that we would be acknowledging this closeness that we have in our relationship. And we didn't talk about the fact that you hadn't said anything, but looking at some of the things that were happening from my perspective, it felt like your behavior was showing me that having a monogamistic where your primary relationship is first and our relationship is second, it felt like what your behavior was showing me was that that's what worked for you. And I felt devastated. I think I just felt devastated. And that, with the attachment wound and us not talking about it, also fueled a lot of this stuff that was going on. And this is, again, where the ADHD is. I think that it's floating around in the back of your head and you're processing it, but we're not talking about it, and I'm not asking about it, but I keep poloing about it, but we're not connecting. Like, do you want to say something? And then I'll kind of bring everybody up to speed on what happened. Like, just the order of things.
Keep going.
So Saturday, I think you left a polo for me, and then I went to Aquafit and I was leaving you a polo. I was starting to feel that attachment injury, and I'm really about naming what I'm noticing and what I'm seeing. That I think that's going to make me feel more empowered in this process. I don't know, next week I may be telling you something different, and so I was talking more about where it felt like I was seeing some of this monogamistic framework show up. I think it felt like a very vulnerable polo to me. I go to Aquafit, I come back, you FaceTime me, and you have things planned for the day. You're going to be with your kid, you're going to be with your partner, you're going to be doing all kinds of things. So I see that you FaceTime me, and I'm like, oh no, were you upset? Did I activate you? I look at the polo, there's a heart. So I think it must be okay. I text you, but then I don't think that we connected at all the rest of the day. So from my perspective, I was vulnerable again. You wanted to talk, but I don't even know what's going on. So Sunday morning, I woke up and texted you at like 6:30 and said, hey, can we talk today and circle back to our conversation? You said, yeah, I'm making breakfast. No problem. And my autistic self wanted to have a time when I knew when that would happen. And then around 10, you texted me and kind of let me know what was going on. And I said, I know we have a different relationship with time. I feel like I'm just waiting for you, because I didn't think I could ask you for a time, but from my history is like, okay, I've talked to you about it twice, and if I say it again, you're going to get mad and I'm being pushy. Now that we've talked, I know that that's different, but like, I've let you know twice what I want. And from my perspective, like, now I just have to sit around and wait for you. And I thought what I would have liked is to say, we will talk after this time. So I told myself that, okay, we have until this time and then we're going to talk. And that worked until about an hour beforehand, when I noticed that I was just really getting dysregulated. And like I said, I came home and just was doing some writing and was crying. And then you called. And this is the first time I've really expressed anger to you. And I was big mad. I want to be clear, like, I didn't yell. I didn't call you names. I feel like I was very factual about what was going on for me and what I was angry about. I'd like to hear your perspective on that. But I was very, very dysregulated, 10 out of 10. And I didn't sleep that night and stayed dysregulated until we talked yesterday. I don't know, at about noon.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear, give you a chance to share. And please share your perspective and how things are different, because this is what I think people need to hear.
Yeah, it was interesting. And, we've talked about how a lot of our stuff is kind of dovetailing together perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read any attachment literature, it's kind of like the anxious attached versus the avoidant attached, and like how some of these dynamics can play out. And that's in a ton of different ways. So I'm not drawing that conclusion on us. I don't know that fits. But, so absolutely, like, I think just putting myself in a historical context in a culture that it is that primary monogamous kind of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm not polyamorous. I love what polyamory is about as far as loving other people non-possessively,
mm-hmm.
right? And I also love that Platonic relationships that enrich our lives so much don't get this hierarchical like demotion, that they can be so important, whether these are family of origin, familial, family of choice, just different people in our lives, that they're all important. And I certainly come from that kind of, it's that one monogamous romantic that is primary, and I think that there's a lot of shifting kind of going on for a lot of us around that. As far as getting on, I think I was a little bewildered, right? Because there has been a narrative about, just I want you to show up, no pressure to respond. I mean, these are definitely things. Now, one part of you might be saying, no pressure to respond, Jen, you go do you. And that angry one probably wasn't the one that was saying that, right? Or that was consulted for that. So I did have space. I think I had an interesting moment because when you were telling me that I was unkind, I think my historical MO would have been just to not bring anything to that, just kind of be like, oh gosh, I'm unkind, like, and to be really hard on myself about that. Pretty humble about disappointing people. I mean, it just happens all the time, as much as I don't mean it. I think that was where I was like, okay. And then what I was hearing was your young, angry part going, I want you to hurt as much as I'm hurting right now. And I'm like, well, that sounds kind of unkind, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And was able to, I'm always curious about projection, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
projecting what we're feeling onto another and intuiting intentions. Because obviously on Sunday, like it was not anywhere in my system to want to hurt you
Mm-hmm.
or to want to be unkind. And I think my own having my sense of self and knowing myself and standing behind myself, not throwing myself under the bus sort of for you,
Mm-hmm.
which might have been something I would have done in the past, was not as present. And it allowed me to be more emotionally available for you, even though we made the choice in that moment not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I did carry that with me. And certainly by the time we spoke the next day, was very curious about what was going on for you, knowing that there was some measure of something I have to learn in friendship with you, as well as there's a lot of attachment stuff
Mm-hmm.
that my job as a friend, as a confidant, is to create space for, be curious and compassionate about. Yeah. So I think that about covers it.
Could we just talk about the dysregulation that I'm feeling?
Are you feeling it right now?
I am.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think this is important for you, the listener, because I think this happens all the time. Like I'm very tense. I'm feeling tearful because I think my go-to is fawn, except for my very big mad, which I'm very pleased about. And I think I'm feeling afraid like you're going to say something that either I did something wrong. It feels like it's a trauma response. And even though we've processed through this, and it's not uncommon, I don't think in this situation, I think you, the listener, this will resonate that when you set a boundary, you may end up feeling dysregulated because it feels like it's not okay. And I tend to go in a fawn response. This time I went big, mad, angry. And I stayed in big, mad, angry, which I think for me is very healthy. I'm a very high internalizer and I'm not spontaneous and I don't generally lose my cool. And so when I do, I almost think it's a good thing. And when
I support that 100%.
And I appreciate that. I'm embarrassed to share this, but I'm going to say it, that I was so dysregulated, like it was a 10 out of 10, and I felt so powerless, and it felt like I didn't have control over the dysregulation. And once I was angry and shared my anger with you, like I hardly slept at all that night, and I stayed very dysregulated until after we talked yesterday. But I felt like at least I'm in control of the dysregulation, like I'm mad dysregulated, and I have control over the dysregulation. I didn't really have control over it, but this feeling of I hate feeling dysregulated when I feel powerless, and the anger because I go into a fawn response. And I think being angry put me in a place of feeling like I was mobilizing that energy. But it was interesting that when I had coaching yesterday and I brought my coach up to date on all the things that we've talked about, she said, how regulated, dysregulated are you? I'm like, I'm a 10 out of 10. She's like, you don't look like it. You're not acting like you're dysregulated. And so I think that again is, I don't know how to do anger. And part of what we talked about is I was not allowed to express anger as a kid. I would break glass in the alley. I would steal. I would lie. I would cheat because that was the only way that felt legitimate to get my needs met. And then she asked me to reflect before our next session of
what did I teach my kids about anger? I'm like, I can tell you that right now, because one of my kids was incredibly dysregulated and had meltdowns all the time. I didn't know how to deal with it. I'd send him to his room. That's what was done to me. Like, I don't know how to experience, express, process anger as an adult. And my husband will laugh at me because when I get mad about things, that really young part is the one that he's like, I want to punch this person. I want to break their things. I want to shred all their stuff and return it. Like, it's very, very young. We laugh about it because it's
burn
humorous.
Into the ground though, but it's heady though. It's like, it can be really intense to feel.
Yeah. And this was big. So can I share some things that I haven't shared with you?
Oh boy, sure. There's stuff you haven't shared with me?
I didn't intentionally withhold it. But like I told Steve, like, I want to take everything Jen's given me and shred it and send it back to her. And like we ended the podcast, we ended the friendship. Like I was just really, really big mad. And when I met with my coach, I said, I'm really struggling, but I don't want my anger invalidated. And what I don't want coming out of this session is for me to feel like I have to go and apologize, like I did anything wrong. I feel like I need my anger supported. If you're seeing perspectives that I need to see, I want to hear that. But I generally, like, I need to be okay that I was mad and I don't want to feel like I did anything wrong. And that felt really important. But I was very frustrated at the end of our session because I didn't know what to do next regarding my relationship with you. And I'm leaving to go.
So this was before we spoke yesterday?
Like right before we spoke.
Okay.
And I'm heading out of town tomorrow. I won't be back for a week. So I don't have coaching next week until the end of the following week. And so I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with this now? Because we didn't really talk about what's next. And I really didn't know what to do. I really wanted to put you on hold for 2 days because this is my young, angry part, that I had to sit with my discomfort for 2 days before us really having a talk. And I wanted you to feel that powerlessness that I felt. And then when I finished coaching, I'm like, okay, so this isn't really working. And I called you and I said, like, I don't even know what to do. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to be mad. I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that we hung in there with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, that phone call was a lot of, and we've actually done this before, but it was sad. It wasn't mad. No, mad is harder. Anger's harder for women for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But we hung in there, right?
We did. And part of the conversation was, I'm frustrated because I'd say this is my perception, and I have a distorted sense of time too, in the last 2 weeks, because I'm going to circle back to something. I did say, show up however, whenever you want. And then when I had this awareness of when we can create a container that creates more safety. So I am asking something different of you.
And the container is setting expectations, which I'm scared to do because I flake out on them all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's going to be a work in progress. It's going to be clay, not stone. Right. It's going to be malleable.
But part of what we did when we talked about when you cocoon, what is the container? Because I don't know. So now I understand that I can reach out to you. You may not respond to me. If I want to connect and send you emojis, I can, but you may not have the capacity to respond. So that, to me, that's a container. I have a little bit more understanding and I can say, are you mad at me? Have I done anything? So to me, that's a container.
Yeah. No, I really respect that one. And that one's vital.
Yeah. And not that we can redo the weekend, but if we could redo the weekend, what I could do differently is to just FaceTime you or say, hey, I'm really starting to slip. I really need you. But I think even that might be slippery. I think me reaching out to you before I really hit a bad place. And that's for me to recognize.
Yeah. I mean, that was another thing that was dovetailing because I was like, ooh, this is an important conversation. I want to be alone in my room to have it. Which often isn't happening until 9 p.m. at night.
Right.
Particularly on weekends that I have my kids, but even otherwise sometimes. And I think it was dovetailing with, wow, I just left some really vulnerable stuff and I haven't heard anything. And I do think, I mean, I have such a soft spot in my heart for that. Are you mad at me? Question. I mean, I don't know if I've ever shared that on the podcast, but I had that trope really going and probably still do. I'm sure it'll rear up again because it's just really deeply embedded, and had someone important in my life that would be like, their typical response to that would be like, well, now I am, because, they didn't understand. They were
Right.
telling the story that now I was assuming that they had some sort of malintent or they were mad and they weren't. And so it was kind of the classic, I would ask and it would elicit the very response I was hoping to avoid.
Yeah.
Thankfully, you and I we're not doing that. And we're not, this is why we try to make so many of those unconscious things conscious, right? Like, what's going on? Why am I feeling this? Why am I feeling this so intensely?
Right.
It feels like it's emotionally not, it's more unwieldy than the situation. It's old stuff then.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's trauma.
It is trauma. It is trauma. Feels like the last 2 weeks, because there's been so much going on, you've had a lot going on and haven't been as present, which often activates my attachment injuries. Like, you legitimately have real things going on. It's not like you ever are consciously neglecting me. But then what happens is, because there isn't a container, like with this thing when you were cocooning. So when we do connect, then we have this repair work to do where we have to set the container and talk about it. And so the thing that's been missing that we talked about on Monday is like, I just missed the chit chat. Just missed, and you'll say like, this is going on. I'm like, I had no idea. And I'll share something and you're like, I had no idea. And that's also been challenging, I think, for me with my autism and my depth, that when I get stuck, I get really stuck and I don't know how to shift gears and get back into that. How do we just get back to chit chat, and how do we make time for that? And part of my value is having that closeness. And we've had very long periods in our relationship where we talk daily, often several times a day, whether it's with polos or phone calls. And so very much being very present in the day-to-day runnings of our lives. And the last couple of weeks, we've had very little of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if it's just communicating uncertainty as to when, or communicating, it's funny. Sometimes we think that I was telling someone, even communicating a lack of clarity is clarifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Or naming, I haven't had a chance to get back to you. I'm still processing it. That those are okay. And what we talked about yesterday is this will continue to show up because our styles and what we want and need in relationships I don't think it's competing needs. I just think how we're wired is very different. And it's not about you changing. It's not about me changing. It's about when you're able to create a container that helps me not get activated. And I need to have a lot more room for how you're wired and to try and communicate with you before I get so activated that I get activated and to pull you in. But knowing that this is what is going to be present in our relationship, it's very unlikely that it will change.
Yeah, it's really chaperoning a little bit those if-onlys. Hey, if only we nail this right, we won't be in any distress again ever about this kind of stuff, which is usually a setup. Right. And then to keep the channel of communication open about it. And I don't know. I know when it's like when we're so in it. Sorry, I'm struggling to find my words here. I think it's so embedded even in our languaging, like Marshall Rosenberg from who wrote Nonviolent Communication, right? It's like he has videos where he talks about like English and a lot of our languages being like the language of kings, where it's really embedded in there that someone's a good guy and someone's the bad guy. And I think when we run our narratives, like it's important to try to remember giving your person the benefit of the doubt. And yet, I don't know if it's just part of that trauma and wounding and youngness, right? Like you're so young. It's like such a black and white, overly simplistic way to experience things. And yet that's where all the emotional fuel is. When we examine our stories, it's as opposed to what I love is where we get to. These are things to understand about each other, and we have creativity and different things that we can try. And I've tried so hard to drop my self-defensiveness, right? Where I don't have to be like, hey, wait a minute. Because now all of a sudden I want to be the good guy. I don't want to be the bad guy. That sucks, right? And so then we've got these, what certainly feels like competing narratives sometimes, but if we can sort of put ourselves little bit up on the shelf and really hear what's going on for each other. And not, so hopefully when you heard my experience of it, it's not in competition with your experience of it at all. Your experience is totally valid. Your anger is valid, even if I'm like, whoa, what are you so angry?
Right.
It's being a little taken aback in that moment this is why it's so important to take turns, because you really have to be able to sink into the other person's worldview and understand what that was like for them fully. And you're going to have to set your narrative aside for at least a hot minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm making sense, right?
I think so. I'm looking at the time. I know you need to go. I think we did a beautiful job, though. I mean, did you feel like I was able to hear your side and be present for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I love how our chit chat, it's almost like, I think if we went in, we were like, oh my gosh, is the chit chat here? Is it here yet?
Yeah.
Are we back to normal? Like, I think it would have been a little too obsessive and been harder to just sort of find that we hung in there. It just sort of surfaced itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm very clear that you don't do any of this intentionally. I'm very, very clear. And, my coach is, because we're working together, is asking me what is your capacity? And it's like, no, we've got this, but it's just that our styles are so different. And it's hard for me to know, the narrative that I want to have is I know that you're not doing it, but if you just set a time when you talk, then I wouldn't have gotten activated. I still could have gotten activated. I mean,
Right.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to pretend if this just one thing happened, then this wouldn't have happened. So it's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
But I think for us being able to come together and to talk about it, and it was really beautiful this morning. You left me a polo and you said, and if you're feeling angry, I have room to hear your anger. And so that I'm feeling very tearful because the anger was never safe in a relationship, not in a friendship, ever.
Right.
Because I've had friendships with people that don't have the capacity to work through things. When the anger came, the relationship ended.
It was just over.
Yeah.
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 And I mean, I had a young part that had moments of that in this exchange where I was like, yeah, it's all over. And I had a very similar, forget it. Friendships are too hard. I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's very similar to, that is just naming your gremlins.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, until, the air clears but real workable, either coming out with a deeper understanding of each other and, or if there's that, are you willing, can we try this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I could feel my nervous system regulating as we were talking. And yesterday I felt so regulated. And today is the first time, and I can't tell you how many weeks that I just felt joy. I was in the pool and had this moment where I'm feeling joyful. Because what I'm finding is when I'm trying to manage the dysregulation regarding attachment wounds, when there's space between us and then we come back together, that's just exhausting. And the fact that I just keep getting activated and I feel like I'm working so freaking hard. And okay, so I talked to my mom and then things should get better between us. And then they got worse between us. And this sense of is it just going to be this freaking hard forever? Because this is exhausting and I don't think I can do this. And I'm sharing this with you to say it's okay to get frustrated. It's okay to feel hopeless. Don't hurt yourself. If you're in a place where you're considering hurting yourself, this is not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about what leads up to that edge before it, that those feelings are okay and there's room for those feelings. And I think sometimes when we've been fawners and people pleasers, that anger really needs to be, and I thought I'm just going to be angry as long as I need to be angry. And I just need to be mad, big mad.
Feel the full range of human emotions fully. As Gabor Mate would say.
Yeah. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think I'm good, my dear. Thank you.
How are you feeling about this recording?
I'm feeling good.
I think
we could use it.
I think so. All right. I love you deeply, friend.
I love you too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So how was that? Was that helpful? Do you feel seen and heard? Do you relate? Those are young parts. I've got young, angry parts. Big mad. If you are interested in working with Jen, you can reach out to her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you want to reach out to me, I'm at unapologeticallysensitive.com, or you can shoot me an email at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how you're wired. You have a right to be big, 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 big mad. You have a right to fawn. You have a right to freeze. You have a right to be regulated or dysregulated. You have a right to not be ready to have hard conversations. You have a right to have hard conversations. All of your feelings are valid because they're your feelings. If you struggle with talking about your feelings, having your feelings, expressing your feelings, I get it. You have a right to have joy, connection, satisfaction, fulfillment, things that make you feel really content. You have a right to be frustrated, angry, disconnected, stuck in your stuff. However you show up in the world is really okay. You're not for everyone and everyone's not for you. Trying to find your people is what we need to do. It's okay to get frustrated and hopeless as long as you're safe. Do not advocate not being safe. But all of your feelings, all of them are really okay. I think that's all I have. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.